So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Inaugurations are normally a glorious time in American politics. The peaceful transfer of power, the country coming together. There are balls, there are parades, there is pomp, there is circumstance. This year's inauguration of Joe Biden was always going to be a little bit different because of COVID-19. At one point they were saying as few as 500 people. Now, after the incident in the Capitol, the storming of the building to try and stop the ratification of the Electoral College votes, it's going to be even fewer and much different. I want to bring in my friend Bill Carroll. He is the host of The Morning Rush on 580 CFRA in Ottawa. You hear him on News Talk 1010 in Toronto and across Bell Media Network at various times. And Bill, when you and I worked together at News Talk 1010 back in 2009, I was jealous of you because I was on Parliament Hill covering how the Canadian capital was reacting to President Obama's historic inauguration, but you actually went down there. So you've seen this firsthand. Tell us a bit about what the inauguration day is like from someone who's been there.
Well, we don't really have an equivalent of this, do we? I mean, what other country does? The pomp and ceremony, the idea of a new president being sworn in front of hundreds of thousands of people in the mall, all the way from the Capitol building, as far as, and this was Obama's first inauguration, just a sea of people as far back as you can see. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And just everything about that. And it's supposed to symbolize the peaceful transfer of power. Something that almost didn't happen this year, depending on who you'd listen to. I think maybe there's a bit of an exaggeration of how much danger the democracy was of failing. But still, you know, given the circumstances, it's going to look nothing like that. I would imagine some media people up on those risers where I was sitting, where if I shouted out Barack Obama's name, the president would have heard me. That's how close I was. And I could look down and there was directly below, people looking up. Beyonce was right there and all the celebrities who show up for this kind of thing. And then just average Americans as far back as the eye can see. It's not going to be that. I imagine the media will still be there. And other than that, that mall will look pretty empty. So it's going to be very sad. And
part of this is COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face that fact. It was going to be smaller. At one point, they were just going to say members of Congress and their spouses. And that's it. And it has shrunk from there again and again and again. Now I'm hearing just a few hundred people on the Capitol steps and barbed wire and fencing everywhere, as well as National Guardsmen all over the place. To me, that is incredibly sad.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? Maybe in that way, what happened a couple of weeks ago on Capitol Hill is in the long run a good thing when it comes to the spread of COVID, because you can't stop people from showing up, despite what their plans would have been. Some people are still going to go to DC and they're going to get as close as they possibly can. That would have been a lot closer if what happened on Capitol Hill didn't happen. So now, because of the security perimeter pushed out so far, I've talked to an NBC reporter who's there this week watching them set it up. He said, this year, there's nowhere you can stand that would give you even a glimpse of the Capitol building stage. So maybe in that way, there is kind of a bright side or a positive out of all of this negative.
If you haven't been to the mall in Washington and seen how big that whole area is, you can see it in Forrest Gump, you can see it on TV, you can see it in the movies. Until you get there, it's difficult to comprehend the size and the scope. And when you see those crowds filling the whole place, how much space that actually takes up. So, they've got to have the perimeter set well back if you're not even going to get a glimpse.
Well, yeah, because there's so much wide open area in front of the Capitol building. We had to get up at 3 a.m. I think I arrived in Maryland at midnight and had a couple of hours sleep. We had to get there at 3 a.m. because it was still close enough to 9/11 that security was heightened in any public environment in the U.S. and here in Canada as well to a degree. So we had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, make our way. It wasn't easy. A lot of the subway stations, the metro, were closed anywhere near the Capitol building. So we had a long walk to get to the entrance. And when we got there, they changed it at the last minute as part of their security protocols. They want you to be surprised, right? Nothing is the way it's going to be. So we had to take a huge walk around part of that mall. And that's when you realize how big it is. I mean, it took us probably 40 minutes to walk around to the next entrance. We stood in line for a long time, plenty of armed police officers, even back then, a very thorough search, metal detectors, all of that. You had to be pre-vetted by the Secret Service. We did it as Canadians through the RCMP, but everybody there had to have the proper credentials. They checked you at the last minute. So even then it was extraordinary. Now you multiply that by what? Tenfold, 250,000 National Guards, and hardened perimeter with fencing and razor wire. I mean, it was a tight place to get into then. It'll be impossible now, that's for sure.
Yeah, I have been to the White House. I have covered several American presidents, but I haven't been through that level of security. The closest I could come to was when Obama visited Canada just shortly after the inauguration. He went to Ottawa, and you and I were talking on the radio back then. You know, you were at my old office. It was in Center Block on the 3rd floor, same floor as the Prime Minister's office, in the press gallery room. I could not walk from one side of the building to the other without going to the basement, through a security checkpoint or two, and then back upstairs to get to the other side. That's how tight it was for bringing Obama in for his first visit to Canada. It is, as you said, multiply everything we've discussed by 10, and we might be getting close to what it will look like. I know there's going to be a lot of people saying, oh, you guys are blowing this out of proportion, this whole Capitol thing. What about Democrats? What about Antifa? What about Portland? Yeah, and I agree that the description of what happened in the Capitol, was it bad? Absolutely, it was bad, and it needs to be denounced. But guess what? I denounced what was happening in Portland and all these other places as senseless political violence. You can't say what about and just make that dismiss because it's somebody that you may support or be closer to than the Democrats.
Right. We're also kind of ignoring a double
place.
standard, Brian, because at the time, the people who are now saying what about, they were saying authorities should have been tougher. So you can't have it both ways. They should have been tougher then. I'm like you. I made the same case. Even I think our government here in Canada, for our Prime Minister to get down and join the protesters in the middle of a pandemic was totally the wrong signal. You know, the rest of us were staying in our houses and people were going out on the streets by the tens of thousands. It was not the right thing to do at the right time. But I understood it. People's passions were inflamed. It was a moment in history you can't take away. It's a significant one. But you know what's really interesting, Brian, and this is where I have not been in the Trump camp very much, but I'm really annoyed watching CNN and other outlets right now, because I remember back in the spring we were watching Black Lives Matter. We in the media were very careful to say most of the people who were there to protest. They have a democratic right, maybe even an obligation to speak up when you feel something needs to change. So, and you got to admire most people. That doesn't mean there weren't a small group of rabble-rousers that caused some violence. The same is true here, and we're not doing that. We're not going out of our way to say, that yes, thousands of people did cross that barrier, but tens of thousands more didn't cross that line. They didn't cross that line. They went to be heard and to be seen, and then they turned back. It was a relatively small number that actually stormed the Capitol building. But in the end, Brian, it's still the Capitol building. And people did show up. I don't think they were organized to kidnap people and hang them, as we even heard security say a few days ago, and they had to retract that. There were some people, I think, on their own who had really ill intent there. We saw the guy with the cuffs, and there were some armed people there for sure. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore that element may still be part of there. It's not the average Trump supporter, not by any stretch. But once you've seen that threat, once you've had a shooting inside the Capitol building, and people are still organizing online, you can't ignore that. You simply can't.
No.
Because you have
especially
to protect
not with
your seat of democracy.
Yeah, people were saying they were going to come, they were going to interrupt. Let me ask you this final question, because not only an astute observer of U.S. politics, you lived there for a long time, ran a show out of Los Angeles, so you know American politics, and you know Canadian. Canadians always love the Democrat. Always, always, always love the Democrat. And we found out that on Joe Biden's first day, he's going to kick Canada in the crotch by canceling Keystone XL. Not a surprise, but do you think Canadians will ever start taking a dispassionate view of American politics and not always saying Democrats are wonderful for us, Republicans are awful? Because I don't think the record bears that out. I think both can be protectionist jerks to us at times, and it's better that we have a realistic view than viewing Obama or Biden or Clinton as saviors simply because of their party.
If I learned anything from living in Los Angeles and hosting a show for 6 years, it's this. Americans don't think about us at all. It's probably not as true the closer you get to the border. And if you run a business and you're doing business with Canada, we're still their biggest trading partner. But really, you watch American news, you sit at home over the dinner table in Los Angeles, and a big international issue happens, and they want to know what the United Kingdom thinks, what France thinks. They don't talk about Canada. So we're an easy target for them. We're an easy target for Joe Biden to say, oil is bad, pipelines are worse, I'm going to fix this on day one, because he doesn't give a damn about what Canada thinks, and no president does. No matter what you think, some may be a little more amenable to Canada than Donald Trump was, but in the end, they're going to do what's right for the United States, and Canada is very small potatoes for them, so we're always going to get a beating, and this is not a surprise to me. In some ways, be careful what you wish for. I didn't like Donald Trump as president, but I agreed with many of the things that he stood for. I wish he'd sold them in a better way, and he wasn't the personality he turned out to be. But I was really hoping that the Democrats would not control both houses, because this is not going to be good for Canada for the Democrats to run amok. They're protectionist in their own way, just less so than Donald Trump.
Well, they do it differently, is how I've been putting it. They're still protectionist. They're going to do it differently, and we are going to be that mouse that the elephant rolls over on.
Well, they just have a smile on their face while they take advantage of it. It's the only difference.
Good talking to you, Bill.
Good talking to you.